Unfortunately, much of World War II can be traced from the decisions made at the end of World War I. The blame was laid on Germany for causing so much hostility, and as a nation, they got the brunt of the guilt. In the closing days of World War I, the Germans ousted the Kaiser and became a republic, but they went into a deep depression as a nation. It was not helped by the global financial crash of 1929. Germany's economy collapsed, currency was worthless. Amidst this chaos, an Austrian politician would rise up to give the nation hope. His name was Adolf Hitler. The Treaty of Versailles had left many countries with internal wars for power. Communism was now the big power in Russia. There was a right-wing movement in Europe called fascism, which was ruled with an iron fist by the men at the top. Fascists felt threatened by communism as it sought to spread wealth equally amongst the people, theoretically at least. Hitler was a fascist and became the leader of the National Socialist Party, or the Nazi Party, in Germany. He promised the people of Germany that they could once again be the great and powerful empire they once were, and even bigger. Throughout the 1930s, as he was voted into power, he made anti-Semitism politically correct, literally. He promoted the myth that the Jews cheated the country at the end of the First World War by creating the German Republic and forcing the armistice. As the years went on, the Nazi Party created a notion of Aryan superiority, and that this race of people was better than the rest. In their quest for ethnic perfection, they sought to rid themselves of many different ethnic minorities, especially the Jew. Germany allied themselves with the ambitious nation of Japan, as well as finding allies in the fascist state of Italy, led by Mussolini, and thus formed what became known as the Axis powers. Germany had shrunk after the Great War. As part of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was not to put weapons in the Rhinelands bordering France. The trickle to war began as Hitler began to arm this area again. They then entered into Austria, who happily joined the Third Reich. They then invaded Czechoslovakia, the first mostly non-German speaking country for them to invade. This sent alarm bells throughout the rest of Europe. France and Britain saw Germany as a serious threat. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain warned Hitler not to invade Poland. On the 1st of September 1939, Hitler invaded Poland, forcing Britain to declare war on Germany. The German invasion of Poland was swift, using a very effective tactic called blitzkrieg, lightning warfare, which made deep, fast attacks with tanks and bombers, followed by the soldiers to secure the area. After conquering Poland, Denmark and Norway, Germany turned west. The German army pushed through the Low Countries quickly and efficiently. France and Britain moved through Belgium to meet them, but the German forces were too quick. The surviving forces had a mass evacuation of mainland Europe from Dunkirk. France quickly surrendered. Hitler mockingly accepted the surrender in the same train carriage the Germans had ended the First World War in defeat. Britain's saving grace was that it was an island. The Germans planned an invasion, but Britain had superiority in the sea and air, forcing the Germans to cancel the invasion, but they surely bombed the cities of Britain. Ireland, while only a fledgling nation, remained neutral during the war, besides allowing Britain to use Irish airspace in the Donegal corridor. Hitler had had an agreement with Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, that he would not invade Russia so long as they kept out of the war. This truce wasn't to last, as both men had nothing but contempt for each other's ideals. Eventually, Hitler decided to invade Russia, and the first few months of the campaign were hugely successful for the Germans. They killed and starved millions of Russians as they pushed deep into Russia. Russia was to lose over 20 million people in this war, the most of any nation. The Russian army at the beginning of the invasion was poorly organised. Russia was seen as an uncivilized country to the Germans. Ultimately, only miles from Moscow, it was the winter that doomed the Germans. They weren't ready for the extreme cold. The Russians were. While Hitler was busy taking over Europe, the United States of America looked on from the outside. Although officially neutral, the United States began supplying the Allies with aid and cutting off oil to Japan. The ambitious Japanese Empire had already invaded parts of China and French Indochina before the war, and planned to expand across the Pacific. On the 7th of December 1941, they led a surprise attack on the American Navy base of Pearl Harbor, causing huge destruction and terrible shock throughout the United States. The attack was supposed to stop the United States from interfering, but Japan had awoken the sleeping giant, and the United States of America declared war on Japan, and thus Germany declared war on the United States. Just as the war had been starting in Europe, Hungarian Jewish scientists who were in America were on a mission to warn the government. Having been studying nuclear physics, the scientists saw the potential for weapons of mass destruction and feared the Germans may be already working on it. They hunted down Albert Einstein for some street cred, who signed their letter to President Roosevelt confirming the danger and urging him to build this great weapon before the Nazis do. It was a race against time. The Allies moved right across the north of Africa in 1942. By 1943, the Italian people had ousted Mussolini, seeing the Allied approach through Sicily. The Allies moved on up through Italy, and German forces came straight in to take over the defences. June 6, 1944 was D-Day for the Allies, as they made a massive landing of troops in Normandy. They fought their way into France and eventually secured their position. Paris had been liberated. Russia, which by now had amassed a huge army, was pushing hard against the Germans. As the Red Army pushed back through Poland, they began to uncover a terrible truth. The Nazis had been rounding up Jews and other ethnic minorities and exterminating them in death camps. In what became known as Germany's final solution, they sought to obliterate the Jewish population of Europe. 6 million Jews were murdered in what became known as the Holocaust. The most infamous concentration camp, Auschwitz, became a custom-built death factory of gas chambers and furnaces. The Allies liberated the survivors. Many of the Jews returned home unwelcome, their houses taken in their absence. The Allied leaders Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin met in Crimea to plan for the future of Europe. The Allies closed in on Germany from all directions. It was Russia who reached Berlin first, and in the late afternoon of the 30th of April 1945, Hitler shot himself. A week later, the Nazis surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Meanwhile, the United States was still fighting a war against Japan across the Pacific Ocean. They had been preparing an invasion of Japan when the scientists had finished developing their secret weapon that was supposed to be used against the Germans. It was an atomic bomb. New American President Harry Truman chose to use this weapon and hopefully avoid a full-scale invasion. On August 6, 1945, the Americans dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. The city centre was flattened and people were vaporized. Many people who had survived the initial blast died days later from radiation poisoning from the radioactive bomb. The Soviet Union then declared war on Japan. They did not surrender, so America dropped another atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Days later, the Japanese surrendered, ending the Second World War. It is still an ethical question asked today if it was right to use such a destructive bomb on a population to save the lives of many in a possible invasion. Once again, the world was a changed place after this war. Many of the Nazis were tried and executed for their war crimes. Germany was occupied and divided into East and West. The map of Europe had changed once again. Over the next decade, 2 large military alliances would form from the Allies, NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Differing ideals between these alliances would set the scene for a long period known as the Cold War. The United Nations was set up to try and prevent another world war. So far, thankfully, World War III hasn't happened yet. Let's keep it that way, shall we? Yeah? Okay? Let's not blow each other up? Good. Okay, thank you. Once again, thanks everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe. Find me on Facebook and Twitter. You can get the links here. And if you haven't already, check out World War I.